"Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Tina Jones sighed heavily, tightening her grip on the steering wheel. This wasn't her first stop like this, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The night was dark, the road deserted, and the only light came from the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser behind her. 2 officers were walking toward her car, hands already resting on their holsters, as if they were ready for trouble. They had no idea who she was. Tina wasn't just another driver pulled over on a quiet road. She was their new boss, and tonight they were about to find that out the hard way. "License and registration," the older of the 2, Officer Porter said, his voice clipped and cold. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. His partner, standing a few steps behind him, watched intently, clearly on edge. Tina handed over her documents without a word, staring straight ahead. Porter snatched them out of her hand without even looking at her and headed back to the cruiser. She watched as he muttered something to his partner before they both began studying her information. "Do you pull everyone over like this? Or am I just lucky tonight?" She called out, her tone calm, but there was a challenge in it. Porter turned around, narrowing his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" he shot back. Tina gave him a faint smile, holding back her growing irritation. "You know exactly what I mean," she replied quietly, but confidently. Tina knew too well what it was like to feel the weight of prejudice. Her entire life had been a fight against systemic racism, hidden bias, and outright discrimination. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, she learned early on that the odds were stacked against her. She watched as friends and family were targeted by the police, unjustly arrested, and humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. She joined the police force to change that, but the path to the top wasn't easy. At every step, she faced doubters, skeptics, and outright bigots. She had to work twice as hard, prove herself again and again, and endure the silent, and sometimes not so silent, biases of her colleagues. Now, as the new chief of this precinct, she had the power to make real changes. But despite her new title, nothing protected her from the same old discrimination. Tonight was just another example of how little had changed. She watched through the rearview mirror as the officers huddled around her documents, clearly confused. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A black woman, driving a nice car at night in this neighborhood, and everything in her papers was spotless. It didn't fit their expectations. A few minutes later, Porter returned to her window. His face was set in stone, and she could see the irritation in his eyes. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his tone more forceful this time. Tina knew where this was heading, but she remained calm. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, crossing her arms as she stood before him. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he replied curtly, avoiding eye contact. "And does that suspicious activity involve me?" she pressed. "We're just following protocol," Porter snapped. "Now we need to search your vehicle." Tina's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "You don't have a warrant," Porter smirked, the kind of smirk that comes from years of unchecked authority. "We don't need a warrant when there's suspicion of criminal behavior," he said. "Suspicion of what?" she asked, holding his gaze. "What exactly about me or my behavior seems suspicious to you?" Porter hesitated for a split second, but then took a step closer to her. "Hands on the hood, ma'am." "You're resisting a lawful order," he barked, and before she could respond, he grabbed her arm and pushed her against the car. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Tina gritted her teeth, refusing to show any emotion. This was humiliating and infuriating, and she knew exactly why it was happening. But she couldn't lose her composure now. "You're making a big mistake," she said quietly but firmly. Moments later, another police car pulled up behind them. The road was still empty, the silence broken only by the distant hum of passing traffic. Tina stood there, handcuffed, as 2 more officers stepped out of the new cruiser and walked toward them. One of them recognized her immediately. He had been there the day she was introduced as the new chief. His face went pale when he saw her in handcuffs. "What the hell is going on here?" the officer demanded, looking from Tina to Porter. "Routine stop, sir," Porter replied, still smug. The senior officer turned to look at Tina, his eyes wide with shock. He knew exactly who she was. "Get those cuffs off her now," he barked at Porter. "What?" Porter blinked in confusion. "But she—" "I said now," the senior officer shouted, and Porter, realizing just how badly he had messed up, fumbled for his keys and unlocked the handcuffs. Tina rubbed her wrists as she straightened up, her eyes burning with controlled anger. "You two have no idea who you're dealing with," she said slowly, her voice calm but full of authority. "I'm your new police chief." The tension in the station the next morning was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone had heard what happened the night before. Whispers and nervous glances followed Tina as she walked into the precinct. Officer Porter and his partner were already waiting outside her office, pale and anxious. They knew their careers were on the line. When they entered her office, Tina sat behind her desk, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Porter's usual arrogance was gone, replaced by fear and regret. "Do you understand what you've done?" Tina asked, her voice quiet but firm. Porter opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His partner sat in silence, too afraid to even look at her. "It was a misunderstanding, ma'am," Porter finally stammered. "We were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Tina raised an eyebrow. "You call violating someone's civil rights protocol?" Porter looked down at his hands, his face drained of color. "You both made a serious mistake," she continued, her voice growing colder. "And there will be consequences. Not only did you break the law, but you also demonstrated an appalling lack of judgment and bias." Porter swallowed hard, realizing that his career was slipping through his fingers. "You're both suspended, effective immediately," she said, her tone final. "There will be an internal investigation into your conduct, and depending on the outcome, you may never wear a badge again." Porter visibly sagged in his chair, knowing that this was likely the end of his time in the department. "From now on, I'll be keeping a close eye on every move you make," she added, her eyes piercing through them. "This department will not tolerate this kind of behavior, not under my watch." As the officers left her office, the precinct remained silent. Everyone knew that something significant had just happened. Tina sat back in her chair, staring at the wall of her office where photos of her predecessors hung. All of them were white men who had turned a blind eye to the deep-seated issues within the department. But she wasn't like them. She was here to make a difference, and last night had been the first step in a long, hard fight. Now they knew who she was, and from this moment on, every officer in the precinct understood that things were about to change. This wasn't just a personal victory for Tina, it was a triumph for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that was supposed to protect them. Tina Jones had proven that the law was for everyone, and no one was above it.